Hello everyone and welcome to another really awesome game from round 1 of the Candidates Tournament 2022. It's Teimour Rajabov versus Alireza Firouzja, and it is also great that I'm showing this game because today is Alireza's birthday. It is his 19th birthday, and it must feel great to have his birthday during the Candidates Tournament. He is the youngest player ever to achieve that magical rating of 2800 in classical chess, and it's if he manages to win the Candidates, it's just going to be spectacular. But Rajabov, he's been playing chess for so long. He's an incredibly strong player. He's defeated pretty much everyone there is in the chess world. Not pretty much, he's defeated everyone. He's been crushing people, since the age of Kasparov and all the way up to the age of Magnus. So he can just beat anyone, and he's an incredibly strong player. So definitely a nice matchup. You guys will like this one. Both of them came very well prepared. So let's dive straight into it. But first, here's a nice photo of the venue. If you guys want to see what it looks like here in round 1, you can see many photographers here. I think the photographers are allowed for the first maybe 10 minutes, while the players are still in opening phases, so they don't bother the players, and I believe they move, and then only one photographer is allowed. Maybe they've changed this, maybe they haven't. I have not seen anything regarding this on the website. And here is one from a broader angle. You can see FIDE President Arkady Dvorkovich making the first move in the game, Caruana Nakamura. I'm pretty sure he made the first move on all boards, but again, not absolutely sure. Maybe someone else will be making moves for the second day, for the third day. They usually give this privilege to sponsors, so it's you sponsor the event, you do get your logo shown all over the place, but also you get to make the first move if you enjoy such things. So just get into the mood for the game. Now let's get to the game. It is Rajabov with the white pieces, and he opens with d4. Alireza replies with knight to f6. We have c4, e6, knight to f3, and now d5. We have knight to c3. The queen's gambit declined is on the board, and d captures on c4. Alireza goes for the Vienna variation. It is an extremely sharp line, and he definitely came here to fight. We have pawn to e4. Alireza abandoned the center, so of course Rajabov will claim the center, and now pawn to b5, defending the c4 pawn. We have e5, challenging the knight here, knight to d5, and knight captures on b5. So this is all very standard stuff. Of course, both of them know this very well. And now knight back to b6, guarding the c4 pawn. I don't know if I mentioned this, but this is the first ever classical game between Rajabov and Firouzja, if you guys are wondering about that. And bishop to e3 now. Continuing development, we have, even though bishop to e3 is an incredibly rare move, here bishop to e2 is just what everyone plays. Rajabov decides to go for bishop to e3, sort of a sideline prepared specifically for the candidates. Knight to c6, and now bishop to e2. Alireza not surprised by the bishop to e3 idea. Bishop to e7, and both players castle. So castles, and now knight back to c3. We have rook to b8, and here again, there are games that reach this position. b3 is the move that is usually played here to challenge that strong pawn, because you might have some issues here. For example, if you play a3, then you make a hole on b3, the knight can come to a5 and b3. Also, the knight might land on d3 at some point if you put the bishop on a6. So it's a nasty looking pawn. Even though it's a double c pawn, Alireza can use this to his advantage very well. And b3 is what's usually played. But we have a3 by Rajabov, and Alireza says, all right, I'm going after that b3 square. Here we have knight to a5. The position again has been reached before. For example, last time in 2018 between top elite players, Mamedov had this position against Caruana in the Sinfield Cup 2018. The game ended in a draw where Caruana played bishop to b7. But here Alireza plays knight to a5. We have queen to c2, developing the queen, connecting rooks, and now knight to d5. We have rook a to d1. This is also a known position, but only within one game. Valentina Gunina defeated Alain Pichot here with this exact same position. But here, after bishop to a6, it is a completely new move. So now, as of move 14, we have a completely new game. So here, bishop back to d2, not allowing this capture because, you have to be careful. if knight captures on e3, you're gonna have a messed up pawn structure, and you don't want to give up the bishop pair too early for nothing. So Rajabov moves the bishop back, bishop d2. This is also with the threat of just knight captures on d5 could be very nasty, because then you have to watch out. The knight here is undefended. But okay, still maybe the queen can capture and defend the knight, but you don't want to allow it if you don't have to. So Alireza plays knight to b3, an excellent square for the knight, and now knight to e4. We have knight captures on d2. Alireza wins the bishop pair, rook captures, and now we have knight to f4. And this is the moment where everyone knew that something was definitely happening, because what is this all about? Rajabov just plays bishop captures on c4, and he says, thank you for the pawn. What is the idea behind this move? But Alireza shows it. It is the move from the thumbnail. Rook captures on b2, giving up the exchange. With no extra pawns, he just has the bishop pair, and he wants to play active chess. So queen captures on b2. It is the only good move for white here. Bishop captures on c4, and now we have rook to c1. And the rook to c1 is already an incredibly interesting move by Rajabov, because basically rook f to d1 is what seems like the move you have to play. But with rook to c1, he is offering the exchange right back. He wants Alireza to go for knight to d3, attack the queen and the rook. He would capture, for example, rook captures here, bishop captures on d3, now knight g3, and the game continues with Alireza maybe having some problems defending the two isolated pawns, but it shouldn't be a problem. If anything, the bishop pair is stronger here. But Alireza doesn't go for this. He just brings the bishop back, bishop to d5. He doesn't want the exchange back. He wants to keep the bishop pair and put pressure. He wants to put the queen on a8 and have incredible pressure along this diagonal. So rook back to e1, defending the knight, and queen to a8. We have queen to c2, defending the knight here, and now Alireza has to decide whether it's okay to capture the pawn on a3 or not. After some consideration, Alireza captures it, and now he's still down the exchange, but he has a passed a pawn that he can start pushing. Here we have knight f to g5 by Rajabov, again with a very deadly threat. Knight to f6, if lands, that's it for Alireza. For example, you play something like bishop b4, you attack the rooks, all of a sudden knight f6 check, and black resigns. You have to capture, or king h8, doesn't really matter. Queen h7 will be checkmate. So Alireza brings the knight back, knight to g6 to close this diagonal, and now pawn to h4. Rajabov now wants to push the pawn all the way to h5, and what can Alireza do here? Well, best is to play bishop to b4. That's exactly what he does. Rajabov doesn't care about material. He just wants to play the absolute best moves, and that is why he is so strong. So here, h5, challenging the knight here, and the question is, what can Alireza play here? And this is a huge moment for the game, as you can take many different routes here. For example, bishop captures on e4 seems to be the most solid one. Point is that now we're attacking the queen, and after knight captures, we're going to play knight to h4. And now, again, what do you play here? The knight, the knight from e4 can't really move, because we're going to checkmate the white king here. So we're going to play h6, and now you cannot play g6. That would be pretty big mistake. If you play the g6, then we play knight to f6 check, and it's game over. You don't really have a good move here. King to h8, we're gonna play d5, we're gonna close this diagonal, and it's just it's just not possible to play this anymore with black. We are completely dominating the position. If you capture the pawn here, of course you can't capture with the queen. If you capture the pawn, you can even play e6, open up this diagonal. So black would completely fall apart here. But okay, after h6, of course, you don't have to play g6. You can play rook to d8. The game continues, and it's you know, it's a game, but with chances for both sides. So for some reason, Alireza doesn't like this. Not for some reason, he decides that it is not good for him, and he is well, a former 2800 player, so we should definitely trust him. He goes for bishop captures on d2. He reclaims the material. We have queen captures on d2, and now pawn to h6, chasing away the knight from g5, but now h captures on g6, h captures on g5, g captures on f7 with check, king captures, and now knight captures with check, king to e8, and now pawn to f3. And if you count the material now, the material is completely equal. It is basically a bishop against a knight, with Alireza's king being wide in the open. So it is definitely white who got the upper hand in that little skirmish there. So king to d7, improving the safety of the king, and now knight to e4. Now the knight is hoping to land on c5. It's a dark square. Alireza has a light square bishop. This could be great, so of course you have to capture it. Bishop captures, we have rook captures, and now queen to d5. So again, equal material, but it is much easier to play it with white, with the black king being so wide in the open. So here, queen b4, going after the rook here. Alireza just plays rook to g8, sorry, not rook to b8, rook to g8. He wants to start pushing the g pawn. We have queen to a4 with check, now going after the a7 pawn, queen to c6, and queen captures on a7. Rajabov grabs the pawn here, but there was no good way of keeping it. Maybe there was, but Alireza says doesn't really matter. We're going to be able to hold this either way. So here we have rook to a8 attacking the queen, queen to c5, and now we have a queen trade, because if rook to a1 check, king will hide on h2, and there's no good way to continue the king hunt. So queen captures on c5, we have d captures, and king to c6. We have rook to g4, and king captures on c5. Now equalizing, but only briefly. Rook captures on g7, going for the pawn here. King d5 going after the e5 pawn, captures and captures. And now you have this position, rook and pawn endgame. Rajabov is up a pawn, and he has a passed g pawn. So can he win this with perfect play? Not so much, but you know, rook endgames are incredibly tricky, and of course he will try to push this for a win. Rook f7 was played. We have king to d6, king f2. Now he starts bringing the king into the game. We have e5, pawn to g4. He starts pushing the passed pawn. King e6. We have rook to f5 and rook to a3. Now we have rook to f8. King to e7 attacking the rook, rook to b8 now, and king to f7. We have rook to c8, king to e7, and now rook to c2. Just, you know, going all over the place to see if maybe Alireza makes a silly move. We have king to f6, rook to e2 now, and rook to b3. Rook to e3 offering a rook trade, but of course you are never doing this. Rook to b2 with check, king to g3, and rook to c2 now. Waiting for white to try and make progress. Rook to a3, we have rook to b2, now comes rook to a6 with check. King f7, rook to h6, and now rook to b3. We have king to f2, now comes rook to a3. So just saying, you've got nothing here. We have rook to b6, now comes king to e7, king to e2, and now rook to c3. We have king f2, rook to a3, and now rook back to b2. We have king to f6, rook to e2, again, trying everything. The moves are happening quickly now in the video, but you know, for Alireza defending this, it took hours because he has to play the precise moves. You do not want to lose an equal endgame, even though you are down a pawn. We have rook to b3, rook to e3, again offering a rook trade, and rook b2 check. We have king g3, rook to c2, rook to b3, and now rook to a2. We have rook to b6 with check, king to f7, and now g5. You either accept a draw, or you have to make a pawn move. If you don't make a pawn move, then the 50 move rule will apply, and it will be a draw by 50 move rule. So you have to make either a pawn move or a capture. So g5, we have rook to a4 now, cutting off the king from the 4th rank, and rook to f6 with check. King to e7, we have rook to h6, and now king to f7, not allowing the rook to go anywhere near the pawn here. Rook to h4, now comes rook to a5. We have king to g4, and now rook to a4 with check. King h5, and now rook to a3, attacking the f3 pawn, pawn to f4, and now e captures on f4, and it was in this position on move 71 that Rajabov and Firouzja agreed to a draw, and their first ever game in the 2022 candidates tournament ends in a draw. The point is, after rook captures on f4 check and king g7, there's no way to make progress with white. Of course, both of them know this, so we can even show it. For example, rook b4, we want to check the black king. We're just going to play rook a1. We go behind the white king, and that's all we need, basically. Rook b7 check, king g8, king h6. You can even push the pawn, threaten some checkmating ideas. Let's say rook a6 check, pawn to g6, now rook a8, not allowing checkmate. And once, okay, you push the pawn, nothing really happens. If rook g7, we just move, king h8, rook f7, or somewhere king to g8, and there is no way to make progress with white here. You always wanted the king in front of your passed pawn. If you don't have it, you will not be able to to do anything in most cases. Of course, there are exceptions. So yeah, after e captures on f4, they agree to a draw, and a very, very interesting game where Alireza prepared a very, very interesting line with the black pieces. This entire thing with the rook on the open b file is just incredibly interesting, with bishop to a6 being the new move. It has been played before, but then this rook captures on b to exchange sacrifice happened, and Alireza really tried to make use of his bishop pair, but Rajabov did not make it easy for him. He did allow him to sort of go for this line that we mentioned, where Alireza accepted the exchange back instead of going for this bishop captures on e4 idea, but this would be a bit too double-edged. As we've said, you cannot play g6, you would have to play rook to d8, and then, you know, the game just continues. So it would be incredibly sharp, but Alireza doesn't want to gamble away his chances already in round one of the candidate. So I think it was definitely a good decision, and they ended the game on peaceful terms. So yeah, after he captures on f4, they agreed to a draw, and that is what happened in round one. So yeah, that's the game. Once again, really hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank KS Dylan, Andrew Lastova, Johan, Derek King, and Aravind Kumar Vendeli for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Candidates Tournament until it finishes. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.